Hi everyone. We are here at the Leapwing Audio Talks today with my friend Luis Pickett, mixer. Nice guy overall. How are you, Luis?
Good, and you?
Man, I'm good. I'm still a bit sleepy. I always look sleepy in these talks, but that's life because it's 10 a.m. here in LA. Luis is in Miami, and today we are gonna talk with Luis about his background, how he started the business, how he got like his foot in the door, and how he went on and doing his own stuff to winning Latin Grammy for mix engineer, opening his own studio, and like basically his life work. Just to let you know who Luis is. Luis, it's a Latin Grammy winner mix engineer based in Miami. He has his own studio in Wynwood, if that's correct.
Yep, Winwood.
And he has mixed for Gente de Zona, like Novedades Carmiña, friends of mine in Spain, and a bunch of other great Latin and as well international artists in Spain and France and worldwide. If you want to know more about Luis, what's your website, Luis?
Just my name, Louis Pickett, Lewispickett.com.
Perfect. And you can find pictures of his toys and studio and awesome like gear overall. Yeah, let's start with how do you like where did you grow up and how you ended up in the US? From
Yep.
what I understand, studying at Berkeley College of Music.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, I was a musician. I played saxophone, native Peruvian instruments like the pan flute, stuff like that. So I always had a wide variety of music that I liked. And then I started, I got this computer from school and was like, oh, the worst audio card you could ever imagine with this microphone. And started to record things, and I was interested in that. And I always knew that I wanted to study at the best place that I could ever think of, and that was
Mhm.
Berkeley.
Yeah.
So I always had like that as a target when I was like even 12 or 13 years old. So that was my only goal, and I was able to audition. I got in. I got a scholarship, and I was able to go to Berkeley. And then you realize, I was like, wow, there's a lot of people that like music too. And you're like, then things start to become more not so much competitive, but you're kind of like thinking, wow, how am I gonna stand out and get ahead?
You basically because I will assume from where did you move from? From Caracas or
I was born
Lima?
in Venezuela, but
Okay.
then I actually moved in Ecuador, and then I moved to Peru. But I
Mhm.
lived most of my life in Peru, and yeah, and I'd heard about Berkeley through one of my teachers, and that was the only place I applied to also.
That's,
So
I mean, the interesting thing that I find is the transition of going from like a small place to kind of the center of music education in the US, which it
it
has
was,
to be overwhelming. Like,
yeah, that's what I'm saying. When I got there, I was like, wow. It was Berkeley at that time was 4,000 students, and I was impressed because I'd never seen that level of talent. You arrive there and you see guys, musicians, vocalists that were just like, wow, like just amazing people.
and how was your reaction to it? Did you, by being overwhelmed, do you say like I'm gonna push harder, or you
Yeah.
were like like paralyzed, which I guess is the first one, right?
Well, the first reaction I never forget when you arrive at Berkeley, you have what's called like a proficiency exam.
Hmm.
So, like, I was a saxophone player, and so each different department you go in so that they hear you play,
Yeah.
and they give you like a rating. So,
Okay.
if you were rating, I think 8, you were like, wow. If you
Over
were,
over 10, I guess.
yeah, I mean, nobody ever got 10. I've heard
Uh,
of 9s, but 8 was like, oh, even 6, you were really good. And so you arrived there, you do like a theory test, even after you got in. So you could fail. It was just to place you in the different levels of harmony, ear training.
no.
I'll never forget that there was this I arrive, my little saxophone. I'd only been in the United States for a few days, and I got to the woodwind department, and I hear some guys playing saxophone, and I'm like, wow, this guy's an animal. Like I don't even know. I almost didn't want to play after that, because how am I going to follow up to this guy?
Yeah.
This guy, I mean, he was a little older than I was, but he'd been playing his whole life. And so I'm thinking to myself, so I went in there and did my thing the best I could. And, after that, I'm starting to think to myself, I don't think I'm going to make it as a musician, even though it's not. I don't think music's about who plays better, who plays.
Yeah, it's not a competition, that's for sure.
But there's a lot of competition, which is, first of all, I want to get ahead in Berkeley, because that's the thing. If you want to play the big concerts, you have to be good. But if there's other people ahead of you, and so I was thinking to myself, well, I still play saxophone to this day. I still love to play, and I feel I'm a musician. But basically, I took that whole concept, and I was like, I'm going to have to practice harder than ever to get ahead in anything. Because even when I arrived at the engineering and production classes, I was like, wow, people really want this. People would get the studio time from 4 to 6 in the morning, because at Berkeley you can rent the studio 24 hours a day. But during the day from 8 to 5, 8 to 6, there's classes. So you could rent the studio to practice from 6 to 6 in the morning.
Yeah.
And you would see guys in there even practicing. And so I realized, man, really, really have to practice and become almost obsessive over being the best that you can. It's not about being better than other people, but it's about being the best that you can.
Personal quest, I would say.
It becomes, I think that to be good with anything, you have to be totally obsessive about what you do. And that's the way that I approached it. And it was never, luckily, nothing I've ever done is like, oh, wow, yeah, sure. When I was at school for maths or physics or chemistry, I was like, man, I don't want to do this shit. I don't want to do this. And then with music, it was never a job. Yeah. It's always like, I have to go to the studio on Sunday. Okay.
Yeah, I think we're very lucky to do what we do and what we like to do. And one question: Do you go to Berkeley for music theory or performing, or as well engineering? Like, what were your studies?
That's the nice thing that I really support Berkeley with, because whether you want to be a music therapy, whether you want to be a producer, guitarist, everybody has to go through 2 years of theory. So you have to do the 4 levels of harmony, 4 levels of ear training, 2 levels of arranging. Everybody has to play an instrument, and everybody has to go through the theory and the classical stuff too, jazz and classical. Yeah. And that's where a lot of people just, they don't make it, or they quit because they're like, oh no, I just want to be a producer. I want to do engineering. And it's like, how are you going to do a music? Whereas, that's, some people took it as like, wow, I don't know a lot about music theory, so I'm going to take advantage of this. And
exactly, like, learn as much as you can of anything you can. Like, that's
how cool it is. I mean, I know a few friends that started with me, and they're in LA right now, and they work. For example, one guy works at remote recording at Hans Zimmer's place. And the guy didn't know any theory when we first started, and I would help him out a little bit. He's like, man, jazz counterpoint, how do we do that? And today he's one of the engineers there after working there when we both graduated in 2009. Yeah. And they're one of the top engineers there, and he knows how to read a score. And he said, man, I'll never forget the time I was in the studio, and they're like, yeah, no, bar 46, punch me in, 2/16, before this measure. And he's like, or, right before, the D minor chord. Yeah. And he knew exactly where.
That is something when talking to students and stuff, I always enforce the idea of learn as much as you can of anything, especially music theory and reading and playing an instrument. Everyone has their own way, and some people that I've encountered, I met, that they have no music notion, that the intuition is so good that it kind of compensates, and it's amazing. But in my own experience, when I started to work in scoring, like I don't know, 7 years ago, and you have to read scores. Luckily, I had music knowledge. Otherwise, I would feel like lost. And I remember in some sessions, we would bring some interns to help out, and some of them they couldn't read music, and it was very challenging for them.
Yeah.
But that was a good thing for them because they saw like, oh, sometimes I need to read music, so they will go and study, which I think it's a great experience to just understand what's your weaknesses and like, okay, maybe I need
For
to work on that.
Yeah, I mean, if you have the opportunity, why wouldn't you today? And I mean, I've heard so many people say, "Oh, well, this Beatle or this famous musician didn't know how to read music." Yeah, okay, but that's their personal case. That doesn't mean that with you and today, man, with the technologies, YouTube,
Exactly, with YouTube, and
any
we are not Paul McCartney, so.
McCartney, you know what I mean?
And
Many of those around.
how, moving on your career, how do you end up as basically in New York City from Berkeley when you went on graduate? How was that? How do you find your first gig, basically?
Well, when I graduated, it was a big question of, okay, so what am I going to do now? I didn't want to get caught up and stay in Boston because I didn't really see anything there for me.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my best friends, who's actually my business partner now, he was like, I want to do an album. I really want to do an album. Help me out. I can pay you a little bit. Let's do it.
Nice.
And I was like, okay. So I pretty much dedicated the whole year to all of 2010 to do that. And then I remember just when I was looking on the internet, just something came up, and I remember something called Mix with the Masters, and it was the first Mix with the Masters. I even applied, sent an email. I was like, could this be real? Could it be fake? This has never happened before. And it was with Michael Brower and David Kahn.
Yeah.
And I remember I applied, I got in, and I did that about 6 months after I graduated, and that was a true eye opener. Yeah. Because once again, I had all the theory, all the stuff I'd learned by myself, everything from Berkeley, but it was almost like a super intensive master class in a week. And then I did that, and I was like, wow, man, I want to learn. I still have it today, but back then I had such a hunger to learn because I wanted to learn everything about mixing and music and production. And I was like, man, maybe I can be this guy's assistant or not. And he was like, it's never going to happen. I'm still here in Boston, what. And then we finished the album, and then I was like, well, what am I going to do? And I remember that I was like, well, I'll go to Electric Lady and be an intern. We'll see what happens. I know Michael might give me a shot. And I said that was really the only thing I could think about. I started to do a few mixes here and there, a lot of stuff for free, just to try and do something, because you can wait forever and you're never going to get a mix when you're starting out. And I was a lot of friends that had graduated. Hey, you got a band? You were doing your solo project? Can I do a mix? And sometimes it worked out good, and sometimes it didn't work out. But it was still a practice of not only mixing, but also dealing with. I started to see how things happen with the client. They're like, well, we want to change this, this, and this. And my mind is like, shit, man, I spent hours on the vocal delay, and you don't like it? And that's something that is really important that I learned super early on. And then after seeing how Michael has been mixing for 30-something years, deal with his clients too, and so there was along the process to get to, for example, between being at Berkeley, that time between Berkeley and Electric Lady, I was already starting to learn a lot of things, even without kind of noticing it.
Yeah, for me, like especially because it's fun, we kind of share a bit of our starting out in the US, and for me at Electric Lady, that's the main thing I learned, like dealing with clients, the philosophy of how to get something done, how to but how to get something great done,
Yeah.
not getting it done, and what goes behind so much psychology between the client and the label. It's just such a big part of the job that when we are growing up and starting up, you are just focused on like EQing the kick drum.
That's the thing. Everybody, you hear, you go on gear sluts, and now with mixed with the masters. I've been there. I've been on gear sluts, man, since
We all have.
2006 or something, and going on there, compressors, EQs, limiters, vintage. I've done it all, and then now with the mix with the masters, with all the videos and Instagram now. I mean, 10 years ago, Instagram, we didn't have that,
Yeah.
and I feel that today everybody's so focused on the plugin, on what does Jason Joshua use for his mix bus, and I'm like, that's really cool, that's really interesting, but nobody ever talks about the philosophy of mixing and then dealing with the clients. Everybody's like, oh man, the client didn't like my mix. Yeah, but why? What's the reason? And it's like my dad comes from the business background, and he's always like, it's always about dealing with people. It's always about dealing with people, and that's what it is. It's all about dealing with people, and also one of the hardest things is to accept criticism too, because mixing is still art. I consider it an art form.
It is.
It's also I'm giving my interpretation of what the mix should be. And I hear so many people like, oh, I don't need the rough. Oh, screw the rough. I'm going to do my own thing. And it's like, I don't believe that philosophy. Like the rough, sometimes I get roughs, which are really good. And it's like, I got to match and improve.
And I think that goes back to the, like, the electric lady and
Sure.
the training of like,
That's a big thing that I learned, because so many people are so focused again on the technical side, but they forget about the philosophy of mixing and then dealing with people. And that's really, everybody has the same tools. Everybody today has the same plugins. Yeah, okay, maybe some of the hardware, but it all becomes the same thing. It's like, oh well, a new compressor plugin came out, it's way better than the other one, I got to buy that. That's great. Yeah, for sure. I mean, just a quick parenthesis, the plugins that you guys do, like, that's totally new. I'm tired of Pultec emulations.
But and that you touch a very interesting topic that like later on I want to keep expanding, especially the dealing with people and how do you read, or I would say like guess or try to read people's minds, because
for sure.
when you when you're with a RAF and you have a call with a client, what do you think? Do you find the most amount of information in? Like, is it something that you kind of feel from questions you ask, or sometimes the client tells you exactly, or you can from their reaction you say, oh, maybe I think they won't go this way?
Well, the biggest issue I think today is that the physical interaction with the clients, that's gone.
Even before all this.
Yeah, I have a lot of clients in Miami, whether it's the artist, the producer, or the A&R, they don't come to the studio, and they're here 20 minutes, 30 minutes away.
Wow.
I'm like, hey, I did a great job, first pass, and we do third version, and we're good. But at the same time, I do miss that human interaction, because sometimes it can be back and forward 6, 7 versions, and so it's very hard. What I started to do a while ago is, well, hopefully you end up with repeat clients and they end up coming back, but you start to take mental notes. Some of the clients at the beginning, I would take a couple of notes of, well, I know this guy likes really wet vocals.
Yeah.
Or I know this guy likes the drums to be really heavy. And so I would start to kind of learn what everybody's tastes are and start to approach things. Oh, well, this mix is for this guy, this producer, so I know he likes like this, and always guiding off the rough mix. But for new people to kind of get into their mindset and kind of think about what they're looking for, I always hear the most, for example, the recent releases they do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even though I think that,
or like just you go to like whatever.
yeah, whatever they did, if it's a producer, hear their, whether they mixed it with somebody else or, you know, just kind of getting a rough idea. Sometimes when I haven't worked with the person before, I also just quick try to fish, you know, it's like, hey, what have you heard recently that you like sonically?
Yeah.
You know, just, and then I everybody's like, oh, I don't reference, you know, oh, I don't, everybody references.
Yeah.
And if you don't, I think it's a big mistake.
Yeah.
Because in the end, you're mixing, because we're doing something sonic too. We're competing with everybody. Yeah. And when you're on Spotify and you're going down new Friday releases, you want your mix to sound as good or better than everybody else. And so I'm always trying to kind of see what they're listening to. I'll compare it to some songs that were released maybe last Friday, just to kind of see where I am, because everything in music I feel goes through, you know, circle. It's a movement, you know. Everybody's like, man, right now, super heavy bass, and we're like more and more, and the vocals more up front, and more and more and more and more, and every week, you know, it's like a millimeter more, and so I'm always trying to kind of compare, because I know that if I'm in the same ballpark, and I'll put those songs in the session, and I'll always A/B, you know. Because I feel that that's one of the best indicators of what they're looking for too.
Yeah, very, very true. Going back to when you were living in New York, how did you went from being an assistant to say, okay, now it's my time, now I'm doing my thing, where do I go from now? And how was your like process?
Well, I got to the point where when you can always learn more. So it wasn't that I'd stopped learning. I just felt that it was time that I wanted to start seeing how I could break out and do my own thing and get my own clients. And it was also, I'd gotten so much knowledge, and there came a point where it's like, wow, I've learned so much, and I can't use it. Like, yeah, I would do a couple of mixes here and there, but first of all, you know, you're so busy. You're working there 16 hours a day. So, oh yeah, you can do a mix, you know, after Michael's gone, no problem. It's like, it's not gonna happen.
Good luck with that.
and so I started to think, man, I really need to see what I'm gonna do. But that's a big decision, because you're going totally into the no, and I'm gonna get clients.
You're jumping off a cliff, like heads first, you know.
And I remember I left, and it was like, okay, so what do I do now? And there was just a lot of just what am I going to do? I don't know. And again, I started to, a lot of people I knew, hey, how's it going? I just did this and this as an assistant. I work with Michael Brower. We did this. Can I help you out with something? Whether you need vocals recorded, whether you need mixes, whatever you need. And some people wrote back, some people didn't. And little by little, I got to the point where I was in that period where I either have to move somewhere because I can't stay here. And so I was like, well, let's move. I was between Miami and LA. Mm-hmm. A friend of mine who I'd done that album with in that year, he said, man, move to Miami. I was like, oh, I don't know, man. I was so many friends, move to LA. I went to LA. I wasn't a big fan. Had some friends that had moved there. And I said, well, he convinced me, and I moved to Miami. And we built a studio in a house, and we lived there. And man, little by little, I'll never forget, I went to see Miami, and there was this A&R from Sony, and he gave me this mix. You know, it was almost basically for free. It was like, and my friend of mine had sold me like I owe that guy a lot, because he told me, like, yeah, this guy was working with Coldplay and Rolling Stones and stuff. It's like, well, you know, my boss had really worked, but that's cool. And so he gave me this, and it was just, I didn't even have my iLock, I didn't have my plugins, I wasn't prepared, I didn't have anything. It's like, oh, you can use my studio, and a room I didn't know, nothing. And I did the mix, and it came out great, and they loved it. And I was like, wow, I got already a mix, and I'm here in Miami, and I actually got paid. I've never gotten paid so much. I mean, it was like $300 for a mix, and I was like,
Man, that's a great feeling to like the first gig, you know.
yeah, I was like, that. This is. I'm in Miami. I got to move here, and I moved. And obviously, it wasn't that case where I was getting mixes all the time. But little by little, I would do a lot of vocal recording, because I figured if I do the vocal recording, I can kind of say, hey, well, you guys thought about who's going to mix this? Yeah. Sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. And just little by little, the way I've always seen this, and one day I would like to do it as an experiment or as like a test, it would be to, how you have a family tree.
Yeah.
So like I'm the trunk, and then I'm sure it happens to you with all your clients. You have a little branch, and then that branches out, and then this person, and then a new branch is created because they heard your work on Spotify. Yeah. And it's just, you start, launching different.
I always ask when someone new like reaches out to me, like, how did you find me? And especially since I live in New York.
Yeah,
I see quite some of the clients are from New York, so I always like wonder, like, I'm not there anymore. How do you?
Right.
And it's just a tree that keeps growing. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, that's the way I see it. It's always very interesting to kind of see, hey, how did you hear about me? Because I must be doing something right,
And so now you're in Miami. You are starting doing vocal recording, basically doing anything to get your client base to grow.
Yeah.
How do you go from there? We met 2016, so 4 years ago. Remember? I mean, when I was living in New York, I knew about you.
Yeah.
Because basically, I was the second Spanish-speaking guy ever to be in that room. You know what I mean? Like, so everyone was like, "Hey, Luis is like, we speak the same language, but we don't."
Yeah, they're like, "Yeah, this guy from Spain. Do you know this person?" I'm like,
exactly, what? But when we met, I think was right before you got the Latin Grammy as a mix engineer. Yeah. How do you? Just if you can summarize in 10 minutes, how you went from, okay, I'm in Miami now, I don't even have my iLooks, to getting your first Latin Grammy?
Yeah, I mean, I still have to think about it sometimes to see how that process happened. I remember, again, it was navigating through the branches. This person led me to this person, and I did a mix for this guy, for this producer Motif that I actually met, and he came to the studios of the house. We had the students at the house. Hey, how's it going, man? I'd love to mix for you. Yeah, cool. Everybody always says yes. And then little by little hanging out, and then after maybe about a year or so, this was maybe 2014, 2015, and I remember I started to do couple of different projects here and there, whereas, today I mix almost every day. Mm-hmm. Back then it was maybe one mix a week, maybe two mixes every,
This is no ball.
It's just little by little. And again, it's also doing the best work that you can, which, we can touch on later, but it's also about, I always was trying to contact these people. I was always, hey, how's it going? If you need anything, let me know. Not almost as a pest, but like, hey, I'm here. And that's one of the biggest things too, was hanging out with everybody. Yeah. And I remember I did, it was La Gozadera.
From Gente, someone is asking actually, what was the Latin Grammy for?
It was for the album, which the song is on there. It was Best Tropical Fusion. Mm-hmm. And I remember we did that, and then they're like, yeah. And I knew it was going to be really big, but then it was actually without Mark Anthony first.
Oh.
And then Mark Anthony jumped on, and then it was like, it's going to be the premiere for the billboards. And then it was just, it all exploded. I mean, it's probably the biggest song I've mixed so far. I mean, it's got like
Great song.
I don't know, 2 billion views or something like that. I mean, it just all came together. I remember when I got that song because that song had 300 tracks. And I was like, wow, how am I going to mix this? Because
Sure. Did you? Because that for me happened only a few times where I heard some
yeah,
like a song that they sent and it's like I'm not sure if this is gonna hit, but this is something. Do you feel that?
I, when I saw, when I first mixed it, I knew I was like, wow, this is really good because it was this producer Motifi. It was a totally different sound to to what everybody else was doing.
Yeah.
And it totally today everybody always says it totally shifted the whole concept in music. You know, today obviously I don't think that style is as relevant, but when I heard it, I was like, hmm. But then when I heard Mark Anthony and they said Mark Anthony was going to be on it, and then the way it was just such a positive song about all the Latin American countries, and I was like, wow, this is a big deal. And then you see the video and
it's an amazing video. I love it.
you see it and you're like, wow, you know. So
very interesting. All right, let's take some questions from the audience, which as
sure.
well touch on what we wanted to talk for this hang. From Marco. Marco is actually one of my former students from the Abbey Road Institute. Marco, hope you're well. Say guys, this is really cool and interesting. Gracias. I was wondering if Luis could ponderate a bit more on the philosophy of mixing he mentioned before.
Sure. Well, that for me, it's a subject that I would love to talk more about because
let's do it.
It's something that I don't think anybody ever talks about. It's happened to everybody where you're in the middle of a mix and it all goes to hell. You're like, man, this sounded amazing 10 minutes ago. What happened? You know, and people, it's like, what do I do now? You know, and I without kind of knowing, I've developed a couple of different thought processes on how to get out of that. You know, for example, I'm always saving versions. So sometimes even if it's if I never even get into the song, because you're always trying to find to get into the door. You know, you're trying to find how am I going to get this mix to work. And so it's kind of like I've always felt like I've started to create, you know, almost talking about it's about creating like safety zones, you know. So like let's say you're starting to mix and everything goes to hell. You know, people will start grabbing a compressor or people start grabbing an EQ and I don't think that that's the right way to do it. The first thing, I always take a break. You know, I'll go out. Like I see people sometimes or hear about people that are mixing for hours straight. I've never mixed for more than an hour and a half, an hour max straight sitting down. I've never done it. You know, it takes me maybe 3 or 4 hours to mix a song, and it'll be segments, 15 minutes, 50 minutes. Grab your phone, on your phone, relaxing. And so the first thing I do when the mix goes to crap, I just take a break.
Exactly.
I come back and I hear it, and sometimes like, not that bad. I don't suck. And then sometimes I'll come back in and it's like, man, I'm not where I need to be, and I need to get this mix in today. So I'll be like, I don't normally pull everything down because in the digital world, I don't think that's something, you know, everybody's like, oh yeah, pull back the faders, we're good. I don't do that. I'll just solo, you know, I'll solo the guitar and it's like, oh, the guitar sounds pretty good. Maybe a little brighter, brighten up a little bit. And then I'll start to reference again, you know,
other productions.
And I'm like, okay, I'm not that bad, but I'll keep with the guitar. So I'm with the guitar. And then I'll start to bring in other elements in. And I'll bring in maybe the guitar and the kick drum. And this is something else that I've kind of thought about, which is like working on the internal groove of the mix. Because everybody's so focused, like, okay, I'm gonna mix kick drum. Okay, great. Kick drum sounds great. Snare, cool. What about when you bring in everything else? You know, and I think that I've really worked on hard is working on the internal grooves of the mix. Because today the way I think productions are built is you have like a little loop in the back, which is like texture, or like a little shaker with a tambourine. And so, I'll bring the guitar in and maybe the kick drum in, and they'll both just play for a while. I'm like, okay, it's not bad. I'll bring in maybe bring in the plucks. The plucks are okay, work on them. But then there'll be, sometimes it's always happened where you bring in an element and you're like, this element's screwing me up. And it might be that one thing that's damaging the whole mix. Yet you're starting to compress the kick drum more, you're starting to add EQ and the mix bus and shit, and you're like, things are gonna get worse. Whereas people always forget about balance. That is the most important thing I've found in mixing, because in the end, you're mixing music. You're not mixing with a compressor or an EQ. You're mixing with music, man. So think about how the music is making you move. Yeah, compressors, EQ, parallel compression, all that helps. But I would go back immediately to how the music is feeling, which I don't think really people talk about.
I think that's a super interesting concept, and for me, for example, like one of the main things I've learned from Michael is listening to the RAF to actually try to find where the groove and the soul of the song lays and shining that. But for me, it was such a concept of learning how learning how oneself feels about something, and kind of trying to understand your own reaction to the music, or how to be very connected to what you first hear and your first emotions, which for me are everything when you mix. What do you think? Like, what's your process with reference mixes, and how do you capture that first feeling?
Yeah, I really, when I prep the session, or I have it prepped for me, I really try not to listen to the rough until I'm in the studio and I'm ready to mix, sit down and press play, because that impression is really, really important to me. Because also I'm going to hear the song enough that I don't want it to already be tired of it. I know some people that listen to the rough before they mix it, and they're coming in, they listen to it on the way in the car, in the studio, and it's like, no, because I want to come in and I want to be excited about what I'm going to hear. Sure, sometimes I press play and I'm super disappointed, but most of the time I hear it, it's like, wow, this is good. And then sometimes a few things happen where I hear the rough and I'm like, first of all, the most important thing is that they haven't put Ozone 9 or whatever version we're on all the way down, and we're at -4, left.
You're done.
Because then I know it's going to be a difficult day of mixing, because I would never send anything that loud, and to send a mix back, lower, that's a whole nother subject. But I come in, everything's ready, my gear's on, everything's ready. So I'll listen, to the rough real quick, and then I'll start mixing straight away. Maybe I was like, well, okay, I really think this song is driven with the plucks. We use plucks a lot today, or even the lead synth. And then I won't wait too long to bring in my drums. Yeah. Because everybody's like, oh yeah, you can make the drums in at the end. I wouldn't do that, because today it's so driven about your drums. If your drums don't have that impact, and if you wait to the end, you're going to be playing with cat and mouse. So I'm always kind of already, as soon as I hear it, and I think that again is based on experience, because everybody wants to mix better, but the only way to get better is mixing more.
Yeah.
That's the best trick I could give anybody. And like, I want to get, what do you use and stuff? Yeah, okay, but don't forget to mix. Mm-hmm.
I look at it as working out, like, especially since, I think it's such an important thing for us to being fit and healthy and stay active, because we have a job that is sitting a lot. And
A lot.
since last year, I started to work out and do a lot of different sports, and that has helped my music. And when I produce or when I mix, how do you think about that? Do you have something, for example, like sports that anchor your day in order to be creative? How do you, like, with the non-mixing things, is
Right.
there anything living as well around to enforce your creativity?
I mean, every day at 6 p.m., I'm at the gym. 5:50, I'm at the gym. Yeah, a couple of times where it's like I can't go today because it's very rare. I mean, I will drop everything I'm doing at 5:45, go to the gym, and if I have to be back here, I'll be back here. I'll be back here in the studio mixing. I have a weird hours. I like to work in the morning. I like to be here at 9, work 9 to 6,
Yeah.
then I'll come back. But the gym for me is super important. I get out of this chair, which I've been sitting in all day. I always, as I said, I take 15-minute mix for 15, 20 minutes, get up, go to the kitchen, sit in the lounge, do something. And I'm also always trying to, well, first of all, I still play, I still create. In my house, I'll have a little piano, maybe play with some software instruments, still be creative.
Yeah.
I'm always, and then sometimes I'll sit down and also listen to music, different styles. It could be Indian music, it could be classical, it could be 80s rock. It could be anything to kind of keep where I am. And then the other biggest issue I've come across too is again going back to practicing, is if I don't mix, let's say in a period of 2 weeks, like when I go on vacation, when I come back, I feel like I'm totally out of practice. I think it's your first of all, for me it all comes together. We're working out where you're building up almost like a stamina and strength, and you can come into the studio and you can spend, because when you think about it, we're hearing music, but really scientifically it's molecules of air that we're getting hit with all the time. Doesn't matter if it's low volume, doesn't matter. You're still getting hit with it. So it's like a Formula One race car driver. Those guys, they're sitting in a chair, but they're doing this. Yeah, okay, wrists, but mentally they're so drained. And that's why for me to find something to build up your mental strength, like I do CrossFit, that for me helps my mental strength when I'm sitting down, and it's like, okay, and then it also creates a level of patience.
I mean, I think as well sports create, like, makes you be more strict, and creates a routine, and creates a habit of repeating work. And for me, especially since 1 year that I started to do calisthenics, which is,
Oh wow, yeah,
that's gonna kick your butt,
for sure.
But I noticed that when especially when I started to do my creativity,
Yeah,
I started to write more music, to produce better, I think. And with the lockdown, it has been a challenge for keeping the energy level up, because it's right now you have to stay inside. So does this environment has affected you in your routine, or how do you find a way to kind of maintain your routine somehow?
I mean, I'm still lucky that I can go to the studio. I work by myself right now. Nobody else is in the studio, so I'm still really lucky with that. The big issue that I see is lack of motivation to do it, and even to work out. I feel, and everybody's the same. There's a couple of producers that I've talked to, and how's it going? Today wasn't so creative. Today, maybe tomorrow. But I still find a way, because I know I have a list of things that I want to do. Apart from life goals and everything, I have a list of everything I want to do to get better with mixing. Like every Christmas and New Year, I always have my list of what I need to organize. So I organize my files, my hard drives, my sessions, but I feel that I never want to like stay still with the same sound I'm doing. So for example, right now I've been working on my new effects template every morning. And again, that comes back to practicing and building your craft, because when I'm doing a mix a day, I don't have really time to come up with a new effect. Maybe I'll think about something like, wow, that would be really cool there. And then I'm like, man, why didn't I do this before? Why didn't I do this before? And so right now I'm trying to build a session with effects, different ideas I have. And again, it's another tool that you have, that you're ready, that kind of keeps me fresh, because, man, everybody's really tired of the quarter note, ping pong, radio effect delay.
That's actually that was a question I wanted to ask you in terms of like, how do you try to come up with new ideas? And we have a question from Juan Carlos that kind of touches into that.
Sure.
It says precisely on that fast mixing mindset of 4 hours back and forth. That's without considering the whole pre-mixing setup you need of your assistant does, because the productions you probably get are a lot of cleaner than what we get. It's fair to say that non-pro productions do take longer because we have to deal with different quality control of the music.
That's an interesting question, because I've gotten stuff from top producers that is an absolute disaster. So, I mean, I've gotten stuff from people that aren't really a name in the industry, and they've even sent me a Pro Tools session with everything color coded and everything like beautifully laid out. So, I mean, for sure, I would say 4 hours without the prep. Sometimes the prep work can take 15 minutes because I have my template, and it's a template that honestly, most of the main core stuff doesn't change. But my effects, I've got another template of effects that I'm always trying to work on new stuff. Maybe I'll try this new plugin. Maybe I have a list. I don't normally change my template. I keep my template pretty much the same, and then I'll have an aux with new plugins that I want to try, and then I'll just drag, and that's cool. And if I use it a few times, maybe it finds its way into the template. But again, I think it's also, when you have a template, it's kind of dangerous too, because you're always going to use the same thing, and it becomes a repetitive process. So that's why I'm always trying to, they're like, oh no, that sounds good. But then it's like, no, I want to try something new. So to try to keep you fresh. Yeah. And I believe, I mean, as I said, I get sessions from people that it just, everything works together. Because apart from it being organized, it's a question of if the production actually works too. Where you're thinking, man, this is not a great production. And then you have to find a way,
like this, that the production is not there yet.
Yeah, it's not there yet. And it's like, oh yeah, they'll fix it in the mix. It's good. And you're like, not really, and sometimes the amount of tracks you get are amazing. I mean, sometimes I'll get maybe 8 tracks. And
8 tracks.
8 tracks.
Amazing.
Kick, snare, little percussion, stereo, bass, plucks, lead, and vocals, doubles. 8 tracks.
I love it.
And it sounds really good. You're kind of like, wow, what am I going to do? But I think with less is more. Yeah. And then sometimes you'll get tracks where they haven't really thought about it. I mean, I've got one track for and it's called Audio 3/4 Dupe. I don't know what that is. So you got to go in there, rename it. And the biggest thing is, I think also I treat my template in Pro Tools almost like when you're bussing stuff out on the board. Yeah. So I'll just have all my auxes. I mean, I have an aux for timpani, for flute, plucks. I have all these auxes already done. I have it all done. And plucks, 1, 2, 3, if they sound similar, play much the same, all of it. Aux, plucks, and it's already all created. And it all just goes boop, 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 boop. And it all just links into everything. And at least everything's organized, because nobody in this world can mix 100 tracks. Nobody can do it. You can't you can't process that level of information. And I don't think it's necessary to be EQing pluck 2 different from pluck 1 when, I mean, sometimes you have to, but most of the time it's the texture, and I think that that should just be printed as one. You know?
That's such an interesting mindset of moving on and committing and like not being afraid, because
Oh.
I think it's not detrimental to the process. We have another question,
Sure.
Andres, that says, "Can you name some songs that you refer when you refer stuff to, meaning references to use?"
I mean, it'll change a lot for the different style. Like for example, I actually just discovered this mix the other day. It's talking about how things are changing. It's a Spike Stent mix, which for me the guy's number one. It's called Super Lonely by Bene and Gus
I'm gonna check it out.
Dupperton. Man, sounds great to me. You know, I think it was just released on Friday. Again, every Friday morning I get up. First thing I do is I look what's coming out on the American charts and obviously the Latin charts too. And you know, for example, that one I listened to and I was like, wow, sounds really good. And even more so, I always like to listen to it on the iPhone. Because I get up in bed on a Friday, I was like, wow, that sounds really good through the iPhone. And then I listen to the studio, and you know, I can add that in stuff. You know, the references are always changing because I kind of want to see what the sound is of the moment. But a lot of references that I like, I really like, for example, Rosalia con Altura, which is a Manny mix, and I think that that's a great reference. Let me see what else.
What was it? The track you mentioned before, "Super Lonely"? What was the name?
SUPA Lonely altogether. The artist is Bene, Benee. Super Lonely.
Super Lonely.
I don't know if I can write it here, but it just sounds really interesting and, you know, upfront, and that's something that I've heard. I mean, the new Dua Lipa stuff, which is Josh Goodwin's stuff. I think that stuff is really good too. I mean, there's some really good stuff coming out lately, and again, it's great mixes, but again, it's really good productions.
Great songs, great like
Songs,
everything.
great productions, you know.
That's awesome, man. We have another question from the audience, from Marco, that says, "How hot do you tend to go into your mix bus? Do you mix with lots of going on or not? You take on loudness normalization?"
Honestly, my mix bus is pretty much the same. Honestly, I don't use any compressor on the mix bus. Um, I've I've never been that successful with it. I don't really use that much compression. I'll use, because I think it's also because I'm doing a lot of parallel compression in the mix, and also sounds today they're already. I tend to mostly mix a lot of stuff that's already processed and produced. So to compress more, I haven't been that successful with it. If I'm going to compress, I'd rather parallel it, because you know I'm not going to alter the sound and just, you know, enhance it pretty much. And I don't hit it hard at all. You know, I mean, sometimes I'll use a compressor, but never ever more than 1 dB max, you know, and I'll EQ maybe a little bit of mid side, 4K, 16K on the sides.
Yeah.
And then in terms of loudness, I mean, it's a competitive world, you know what I mean? If I always will send a client a mix with the limiter, you know, maybe once every 2 years, the client will be like, no, send it to me without the limiter. Of course, when I send it to mastering, I'll take it off. But I don't hit it hard. And in terms of where I'm hitting luffs, it depends on the song. And, you know, sometimes I get rough mixes, which are so loud. And it just becomes a point where I'm just competing who's the loudness. Because then you have to make the decision of, do I want to send a mix which sounds just a little bit better, but it's the same loudness, and all my hard work for making all the details just mush?
Yeah.
Or do I send it a little less loud and it's more musical? That's kind of decisions that you have to make.
That's a tough choice, and I guess you have to know your client, or like
Again, knowing your client, write a list. I know that John likes this. I know that, and there's nothing wrong. It's all about yourself to become better. I'm if I don't have a mix from a client, I'm always in here doing an effects, thinking of trying a new plugin.
working out,
Practice mix, huh?
working out, basically.
Working out, or doing anything I can do to be better.
Yeah.
I can't sit down at 2 p.m. and watch Netflix. Maybe with the quarantine, some people are doing that, and you can't feel bad about it. But
Exactly. And we're almost, I think, out of time. If anyone has any questions, please let's put it in the chat. But and how do you? I have a question myself. How do you find that having a separate location for your, let's say, for your work and your life, does that help? Do you sometimes do stuff at home because it's easier to be at home, like especially right now? How do you find that process?
well, I mean, I miss working at home sometimes because it's never been an issue with me where I would get up and it was like, oh, I need to go to the studio. I just get up and go. One thing is working in my underwear at home. I get up and I just go sit down on my chair and I'm working. But at the same time, it's interesting because if a client needs a change and I'm home, yeah, I admit there's a few times where I've had to go back to the studio. Like I finished at 6, I worked out at 7, and I'm done. And then at 10 they call and it's like, wow, we need this change, and I'm like, man. And that's where you decide.
Yeah.
Sometimes I go do it when it's something that's really important, and then sometimes it's like I'll do it the next day. When it's something important, and I don't feel like it's I have to go do it. It's like, how bad do you want it?
Yeah.
Because I also believe it's all a part of service. Like I have a Box cloud account, the same as Dropbox. I use Box, and I upload all my stems, all the masters, all the mixes for master, all the alternate mixes, TV, instrumental, a cappella, and they're all in the cloud. And so sometimes an A&R can be at 10 o'clock at night. Send me the stems for this. Okay, here you go. You have it. It's like, wow. So that level of service where it's not like I have to go to the studio. So I've had to work out different things like that.
Yeah.
It also makes me think like, okay, I'm done for today, and like I need to go to the studio work. I feel it's also helped create more of a hunger for me to work.
Yeah.
Because I have to go to the studio, and I'm like, I'm excited to go because I haven't been there all day, or I haven't been like I'm ready to go.
Very, very interesting. What you said about having like a cloud service with everything ready to go. What service do you use for that, for example?
Box.com. It's like Dropbox. I just think I like the interface a lot better.
Yeah.
And again, it's part of the service of impressing your clients, not having to wait till the next day.
Yeah.
I think that stuff like that is really important.
That's very, very good, very good, very good.
I
don't see any more questions from the audience, so we're gonna wrap it up at 59 minutes, almost 1 minute to go. Again, I wanted to thank you, Luis, for taking the time and sharing your experience, your knowledge, your mindset behind what you do, because you are doing great work, and I wish you that very much success in the upcoming years, and a lot of Latin Grammys and American Grammys in your way.
Hopefully.
And yeah, for the audience, they basically they can reach out Luis, I guess, at luispickett.com.
Yeah, luispickett.com, or my Instagram if you have it. So
what's your Instagram?
Picketl. Just my last name with 1 T and an L.
Perfect. You can
It's on my website too. So
reach and see what Luis is up to in there, and as well see pictures of his awesome studio. That it looks great. Congratulations on the studio, by the way.
thanks, man. You have to come to Miami.
Well, I hope to see you soon in Miami when this is not over, but I guess under control, because
For sure.
this is what it is. But thank you. Have a great time, Luis. Take care.
All righty, thank you, man. See ya.
Bye.